All right. Welcome everyone to our High Thrive Live today. I'm Heather Choate here with Mark Johnston, an international marriage expert and coach. And I'm an international mindset marriage and expert and coach. So we're grateful to be here with you all today and excited for the growth of this group. And one thing that Mark and I had seen a lot of questions from you guys is that when do I know to give up? Like, how do I know when is it enough? You know, my spouse maybe wants a divorce or they might be having an affair. When is enough enough? And so to make things really clear for you all, Mark and I have two signs that are pretty good indication that your marriage is over. Now, we never really like to use absolutes, but this is a really good kind of rule of thumb to use as you're looking at your situation. And I'll give you a hint. It's not just because your partner, your spouse wants a divorce. That isn't one of the signs that your marriage is over. So let's talk about that. Mark, what is the very first sign that someone's marriage might just be over?
Well, if things have gotten to the point where the two of you really have no communication anymore, it's really hard to work on the marriage at all if that's not happening. Even then, there are some things that could be done to reinitiate some of the communication, but in order to do that, there has to be a reason to reinitiate the relationship. So when people come to me with this sort of issue and they're saying, okay, yeah, my husband or my wife is no longer talking to me anymore, what do you do? You know, I generally will tell them, okay, you need to find some goal, some reason that they would actually want to talk with you again. Quite frequently, you know, there's something that your spouse wants, whether they have stated that they at some point want to remain friends, or they want, you know, to lower the tension for the sake of the kids or anything like that. But even that, like I said, even then, there's a few things that you could try. But, you know, if it's just staying in that position right there where there's no communication, you know, they ignore your texts, they don't want to talk. I would say that at that point, it's really hard to do much there.
Right. And sometimes we get people that say, you know, I've got a restraining order against me, or me or my spouse are in prison. And so, unfortunately, in those situations where there's very little chance of having any sort of communication in the near future, that just simply you have to be able to communicate at least on some level in order to reconnect and restore your marriage. So then the next question that we get, Mark, is, okay, what if my spouse and I, we do communicate, but it's only about like business stuff. We're only talking about the kids. We're only talking about like the divorce or like how to kind of manage things going forward. And there's no communication about the relationship. What do we do in that kind of circumstance? Can that kind of situation be saved? It's a common question that we get. So how do we address that? Can that be saved?
Well, I'd like to start that off with a bit of a question. I'm going to ask people, did they need to talk about their relationship when they were first starting their relationship with this other person? And the likely answer is no. You probably started off simply getting to know each other a little bit more and progressing from there. So even if the communication is very limited, you don't necessarily have to talk specifically about the relationship to make progress. But there has, to a certain extent, your goal in that situation should be to have some sort of desire at some level to have a relationship together. And that's what I was talking about before. You know, if there is some goal that your spouse wants and you're able to work on that with them, that's a really good avenue to beginning to work on things. So even if for right now you're saying, okay, we're going to work on being good friends, that's a really great path to start on and towards fixing things. Or if they say, I want to make sure that things are good between us for the kids' sake, great. That's a great path to start down. And, you have a lot of, from there, as things get better, you'll have more ability to go further into the relationship.
Right. I think that one thing that trips people up a little bit here is that when your spouse is pulling away, you can become so desperate to want to get that recommitment from your partner, that certainty. You kind of want to take it from where it is to a level way, way up here, right? And so it often seems like that might not be enough. But Mark, you and I have had the privilege of working with clients and people. And so can you just give us like, let's just go back and, we've helped a lot of people. And I can think of a couple instances, I'm sure you can too, where it was just kind of this surface level communication and they were just not talking about the relationship, but they were talking about the kids, they were talking about business stuff, they were maybe even talking about the divorce. How can someone in that situation use those opportunities to actually reconnect? Because it might not seem like that's much of a possibility, but you and I, Mark, we know that that is. So what would that look like for someone who's actually in that kind of situation?
That's a really good question. Usually in these sort of circumstances, what I suggest is you take where you're at right now and you just push a little bit further and you see where that line of comfort is. Like you kind of know, okay, my husband, my wife is fine talking about the kids and on these subjects. But as soon as we get to right here, that's when they start getting upset and they start, raising their voice or, shutting down or whatever. And in those instances, these are actually really good opportunities to actually make, open up some doors in the situation. And what I tell people is that in these instances, you're hitting a wall, you're hitting an obstacle here, and that obstacle itself needs to be addressed. What I frequently see is people are, like you said, they're so desperate for getting things to the way they were. They're focused way over in the distance on that goal and not really taking the time to address everything that's all the little obstacles that are keeping you from getting there. So in that moment, it's really good to point out the emotion. Hey, you seem really upset right now. How come? And they might even tell you, well, you keep bringing up the relationship. Okay, well, yeah, I do bring that up sometimes. Why is? Just curious why that's so upsetting. And you get to processing and dealing with that obstacle right in front of you. Those things tend to be easier to sweep aside, and now you're able to move on to the next step, the next obstacle. So don't focus in on the long-term goals, just focus in on what's in front of you.
Right, we talk about that 1 degree of difference. I was just, we did our group session yesterday with our live clients in the relationship reboot course. That was so awesome.
Yeah.
Some absolute gold value there. And we're talking about that 1 degree of difference, that you just make that slight course correction to get where you want to go. And within time, you're way further than where you want it to be, rather than trying to take a big leap forward that neither you nor your spouse are ready for. And that right there is one of the most common mistakes that people make in this situation. They think, okay, my husband, my wife, we're only talking about business stuff. We're only talking about the kids and soccer and bills and stuff like that. And then they try to push it really, really hard in those instances for the relationship and trying to get their spouse back, that they push their spouse further away. So that's one of the most common mistakes that we see. And so it's learning how to utilize those opportunities in the best way possible.
Yeah, I would say the big problem in that situation is likely, when there is such big, walls here, it's very likely that your husband or wife is afraid of, if they go any further, what that's going to mean. And, are they going to have to commit for more? So if we can bring that down quite a bit, hey, we're just committing to talking about this right now. It's not a big deal. It doesn't have to go anywhere. We're bringing those expectations down. It tends to diffuse those situations fairly well.
Right, you're taking the pressure off, and therefore it's making things comfortable and safe for both of you to be able to open the door to reconnect. So it's a really beautiful thing when you can learn how to use those opportunities that are actually there. You got to recognize that they are there and then learn how to utilize them. So that's our first sign that your marriage is over, is if you have no communication at all, nothing, zip, right? If you have even the small amount of communication talking about business surface level stuff, that's been enough. And Mark and I have, I'm just reminding myself of like those, we had a client back in January, and it was very much this way. He and his wife were very surface level, and he kept pushing it and kept pushing it and kept pushing it, which only pushed her further away. And so when he learned how to actually bring some understanding to those situations and make those things safe and comfortable again, then he was able to, like Mark said, open the doors a little bit and overcome the obstacle right in front of them, and then overcome the next one and the next one and the next one, to the point now where they're doing really great in their relationship and things have come so far. But it was learning how to take those very first steps. It's so important. So now we're going to talk about the second sign that your marriage is over. And the second sign, drum roll, I'll announce it if you're good with that. The second sign is, we often hear that, your spouse may be having an affair, or you're having an affair. And just like your spouse may be talking about divorce, an affair isn't necessarily the end of your marriage. But what is a sure sign that your marriage is very unlikely to be saved is if your spouse or you are making future plans with another person. So what does that look like when someone, like, what are we talking about future plans, Mark? And why is that a sign that things are going to be much more difficult to turn around at that point?
Well, usually what we're looking for is something like that. Is, are they looking to buy property together? Are they looking to share assets? Are they looking to get married, have children? Serious commitment. And that's the key right there, is there serious commitment? Because as soon as that happens, the likelihood of them wavering from that, it just drops dramatically. Just like, for the most, in most healthy relationships, where there is some serious commitment, the likelihood of that couple, splitting apart right in that moment just isn't very likely. In the same case here, if your husband or wife has found someone new and they've created that bond and that serious commitment elsewhere, there's not going to be any amount of pushing on at that point is just going to be seen as destructive, as negative, as it's not a good situation to keep pushing there. But I think the point that should be made is, without that serious commitment, even if your spouse is, say, dating other people, or involved in an affair, doesn't mean that things are necessarily over. There's sure big obstacles to overcome at that point. But Heather and I have helped plenty of people involved in affairs and helped them to set the boundaries in order to end the affairs, gain the respect necessary to get their spouse back, and get things on a good track. That's something that we do all the time.
Right. And even in this group, hello, everyone watching. And yes, you still have hope. That's awesome. So congratulations. It's really good to recognize when there is hope. And there's absolutely hope. Beautiful woman in our group, Deardorff Smith, has been very open about her journey. When she first started working with us, just back in March, her husband was in a current affair with another woman and was having relationships with both women. And you're welcome to read her posts in the group, as she's been so kind to offer that inspiration to other people that it is possible. So, we were able to guide her on setting healthy boundaries in that kind of situation, and taking each obstacle at a time in the right order, not out of sequence, to the point where then she was able to make things safe and comfortable in her relationship. And then I'll never forget this week when it was time to have the big conversation with him, and she posted this in the group as well, that it was time to ask her husband to leave the other woman. We had gotten things to the point in the relationship where that was where things were at. And then the husband made that decision that he was going to leave the other woman. And since then, Leah and her husband have been working on their relationship and doing tremendously better. So that's just a clear illustration right there, that just because your spouse is having an affair doesn't always mean the marriage is over, right? But a clear sign that things will be much more challenging is if they've made serious commitment with another person.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Anyone have any questions about this? We're on here for a few more minutes, but the two sure signs that your marriage is over is no communication and if your spouse is making future plans with someone else. If that is not your situation, if you can ask yourself and say, okay, do we have communication? Do we communicate at least once a week? Are we both, not making future plans with someone else? If you can answer yes to either of those, then there is a really, really good possibility for your relationship to turn around and your marriage to be restored. Mark and I, again, we don't like to use any absolutes because truly anything is possible. And there's always going to be evidence that someone that was, making serious future plans with someone else turned around and was still able to save their marriage. There's still evidence that those who have zero communication, suddenly something changed and they started communicating. So, there are no impossibilities, right? We live in a universe of infinite possibilities. And so we just want to offer this as guidance and give you a lot of hope that your relationship, may be a lot better off than what you're perceiving it to be. And just a kind of a final thought on my end, and then we'll see if Mark has anything else he wants to share, is that, speaking of possibilities, I was just recognizing today that 4 years ago was the month that I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And doctors were telling me that I had very little chance of making it and keeping my baby and just surviving it based on what it was at the time. And so, talking about going against the grain, going against what other people are saying, if you want something enough, it can absolutely happen. But that means you got to dig in and have some real grit and tenacity to get there, and grow through those challenges and become who you really want to be in those challenges and let them become strengths rather than completely defeat you. So just hope that gives some hope and inspiration, insight to anyone. I understand there can be some real serious challenges and difficulties going on in your lives. But those are the moments that really make us as people and help us to become stronger and better. So we have a question here real quick. What do you do when both people love each other? Oh, there we go. Okay. But only one seems to be putting in any effort to confront things while the other doesn't want to do counseling, is easily angered, definite triggers, poor communication. Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about with one person pulling away from the relationship and the other really wanting to work on it. What's really key here, and I'm sure Mark is going to touch on this, is that both people love each other. So that is a huge foundation right there that you can really work off of.
So my thoughts on that, yeah, like Heather says there, just the fact that both are admitting that there's love in the relationship is huge. You have a huge amount of, I guess, what I would call wiggle room as far as enacting some sort of progress here. The things that would be keeping that from going forward is, I guess the things that you would need to establish to go forward, you would need to establish, okay, what is the person who's kind of pulling back and not making effort, what do they actually want? And if you can take that, there's even a lot more that you can do. So if they're saying, hey, I want more connection, or even if it's, something as simple like I want more sex, something like that, there's a lot of things that you can do that you take that and say, okay, great, let's take this right here. What do we need to make this happen? Further, it very well may be that in order to make more progress, there needs to be some, I guess, more sharing of feelings, being a little bit more intimate and bringing the problems out into the open. If there are things that are preventing you from actually having the happy marriage, those things will need to be addressed. If that still won't be addressed, if this husband won't put out the effort, then at that point, it is a risk to the marriage, and you need to do what you need to do to protect what's important. In other words, setting a boundary, saying this is what needs to be done, this is what you want, here's this healthy way to get it, but this is what we're going to do, and just being a little bit more proactive. Yes, I imagine, if it were simply as easy as just going to your husband and saying, oh, we're going to get this done, it would already be done. but that, in essence, would be the line that needs to be drawn, and respect needs to be gained in order to get them to essentially hear you out and understand that this is not the direction that it can go on if it's going to continue. So, just to summarize, it's find those common goals, use that as a way to motivate some progress and some cooperation. If that doesn't work, then you set some boundaries, get some, woman up, I suppose, and
Actually, a man.
get some respect there.
Yeah. For some reason on this BeLive platform, they don't let us see who's actually saying the comments anymore. It's just a new privacy thing that Facebook did. So what we see on our end at this point in the live stream is just says comment from Facebook. So unfortunately, we can't see who you are anymore like we used to. That's just thanks to Facebook and all the changes that they make all the time. But I think he says here, I'm the passionate one and communicator, but she's a natural born runner by default. So I think what you want to find out here, like Mark was suggesting, is why is she running? What is she needing? And if you can meet her there and understand that root issue that's causing that, tug and pull, then you're going to be able to draw her back in as you meet that need, whether it's, it might be security, it might be significance, but why is she running, right? Yeah. Anything else with that, Mark?
I think that's good.
Okay. All right. And then I'm just going to touch on one real quick. What's a good step to get her to talk about some things except generic one-word answers? Now, we're not going to go deep into that one right now because we've actually covered this in past live streams on how to open up that communication and use those opportunities. There's different ways to ask questions that will encourage more than a one-word answer and help your spouse to open up. So rather than going deep into that right now, I will simply post the link to that, some past live streams. And we also have a free guide on how to improve communication in marriage. So I'll post those both there as a good resource for you to get started on that. And as always, if you feel like you are ready for a more in-depth look into your marriage, if you want more individualized approach to what you're facing, then just like when I had cancer, I didn't just go to a general doctor, right? I went to a specialist. In fact, I went to the top 5 specialists in the world to get solutions on how to save my life and save my baby's life. So going to the right person for the right answers is what Mark and I are all about. We're the ICU unit of struggling couples who, your spouse may be checked out. You may be failing to communicate, failing to have them open up. And so it's really crucial that you understand what those blocks are, what's creating that gap between you and your spouse, and not just the surface gap, but the root issue, because we could slap a Band-Aid on it and that's not going to do you any good. Just like if they slapped a Band-Aid on my cancer tumor, that would not have fixed it, right? We need to go deep and figure out what the root issue is. So Mark and I, we always offer a free breakthrough session to help you get real clarity on what's going on, what that root issue is, and then how you can solve it. So not just a baby aspirin, but the cure to the ailment that is going on in your relationship. So if anyone is interested in one of those sessions, feel free to reach out to Mark or I in private message, and we can also post the link there. So we appreciate you all and hope you guys have a happy, fantastic, thriving Thursday. And again, remember that there is most likely an immense amount of hope for you in your relationship, and that, things might be really challenging right now, but those challenges can make you stronger and better than ever before. Any final thoughts, Mark?
I think we're good.
All right. Well, thank you all so much, and we'll talk to you soon.